The first scream came from beneath the grave at exactly 2:13 inches the morning, and Deputy Aaron Miles would later swear under oath that the voice crying for help sounded exactly like 16-year-old Emily Cross, even though Emily had already been buried for 3 days. The cemetery sat behind Blackthorn Forest on the edge of a dying town called Griffin's Hollow, a place where people locked their doors before sunset and never asked questions about the woods. Rain hammered the crooked gravestones while Aaron stood frozen beside the fresh grave, his flashlight shaking in his hand as another scream rose from underground. "Please, don't leave me here." The voice was weak, terrified, human. Aaron stumbled backward in horror, mud splashing across his boots as cold air crawled through the cemetery like something breathing beneath the earth. Emily Cross had vanished 8 days earlier, after leaving her night shift at a roadside diner near Highway 9. The entire town searched for her. Flyers covered every pole. Her mother cried on live television. Then hunters discovered her body near Blackthorn Creek, with dirt under her fingernails and blood dried around her mouth. The coroner declared it a homicide, closed casket funeral, buried immediately after sunset, because the family couldn't bear another moment looking at her. But now Aaron could hear her voice from beneath 6 feet of wet soil. Another scream exploded from underground, louder this time, followed by violent scratching. Aaron immediately called Sheriff Daniel Hargrove, and within 20 minutes, police vehicles flooded the cemetery, their flashing lights bleeding through the rain like wounds in the darkness. Sheriff Hargrove arrived pale and furious, refusing to believe Aaron's story until the voice echoed again beneath the grave. Every deputy heard it. Every officer stepped back in fear. Emily's mother collapsed screaming when she arrived at the cemetery and heard her daughter begging beneath the earth. "Dig her up!" she cried hysterically. "Please, God, dig her up!" The deputies hesitated, exchanging nervous looks while the scratching continued underground. Finally, the sheriff ordered them to dig. Mud flew through the storm as shovels tore into the grave. The screams became louder, faster, desperate. One deputy dropped his shovel and vomited from terror. Then, suddenly the screaming stopped. Complete silence swallowed the cemetery. The deputies froze. Only rain remained. Aaron felt his chest tightening as they reached the coffin lid. Sheriff Hargrove slowly pried it open while every flashlight pointed downward. Emily Cross lay inside exactly as she had been buried. Dead, motionless, pale blue skin, sewn funeral dress untouched, her lips closed forever, but her fingernails were shattered and bloody, as if she had clawed the coffin walls from the inside. Emily's mother let out a sound that no human being should ever make. One deputy fainted instantly, another stumbled away praying under his breath. Aaron stared at the coffin walls covered in deep scratch marks while water dripped from the sheriff's shaking hands.
My God!
Then they noticed something worse.
It's blood
Emily's
everywhere.
body had changed
We need
position.
backup.
According to the funeral director, her hands had been folded peacefully across her chest during burial. Now both arms stretched upward toward the coffin lid, like she had tried to escape. The story exploded across Griffin's Hollow before sunrise. Reporters surrounded the cemetery by morning. Some claimed Emily had been buried alive. Others whispered about curses hidden beneath Blackthorn Forest. But Sheriff Hargrove ordered complete silence, warning everyone not to spread panic. An autopsy was scheduled immediately. Aaron could not sleep after what he heard that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined Emily screaming beneath the dirt. By dawn, he drove alone toward the abandoned diner where Emily had last been seen alive. The building stood isolated beside the highway under flickering neon lights that barely worked anymore. Inside, old grease smell mixed with cigarette smoke. The owner, Martha Green, looked terrified when Aaron entered. Her hands shook while pouring coffee. "You heard the grave too, didn't you?" she whispered. Aaron nodded slowly. Martha stared toward the kitchen before speaking again. "Emily wasn't acting normal the night she disappeared." Aaron leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Martha swallowed hard. She kept hearing someone calling her name outside the diner. Cold silence filled the room. Martha explained that Emily repeatedly walked to the windows during her shift, staring into the darkness near the tree line across Highway 9. When Martha asked what was wrong, Emily said she could hear a woman whispering from the woods, whispering her name over and over. Around midnight, Emily suddenly panicked after seeing a figure standing near the forest. A tall man wearing black clothes, no face visible, just standing there motionless beside the road. Emily left the diner crying minutes later and vanished forever. Aaron immediately requested nearby traffic camera footage. Hours later, technicians recovered corrupted video from a gas station camera 1 mile from the diner. At 12:17 a.m., Emily's car appeared speeding down Highway 9. Then the footage distorted violently with static. When the image cleared, another vehicle followed directly behind her with headlights turned off. The sheriff's department traced the vehicle to an abandoned property deep inside Blackthorn Forest. The house once belonged to Elias Thorne, a former mortician suspected in multiple disappearances during the 1980s before vanishing himself. Locals called it the Hollow House. Nobody entered the property for over 20 years, until now. By sunset, Sheriff Hargrove led a search team into Blackthorn Forest while thunder rolled overhead. Trees blocked most sunlight, making the woods feel permanently trapped in nighttime. Aaron noticed strange symbols carved into trunks as they walked deeper through the forest. Some looked fresh, others stained dark brown like old blood. Then the smell hit them, rotting flesh. One deputy discovered dozens of dead animals hanging from branches ahead, their bodies split open carefully like surgical experiments. Sheriff Hargrove ordered everyone to keep moving. Finally, they reached the hollow house standing between dead trees like a corpse refusing to decay. Broken windows stared outward like empty eyes. The front door hung partially open. Aaron felt pure dread climbing the porch steps. Inside, the house looked frozen in time. Dust covered everything. Old photographs lined the walls. Most showed funeral processions, graves, and smiling families standing beside coffins. But every photograph contained the same shadowy figure standing in the background. Tall, blurred, watching. The deputies searched room by room until Aaron discovered the basement door, locked from outside. Deep scratch marks covered the wood. Someone or something had tried to escape. Sheriff Hargrove forced the door open slowly. A freezing smell drifted upward from the darkness below. Aaron aimed his flashlight into the basement and immediately felt sick. The walls were covered in hundreds of names carved into the concrete. Missing people, dates, messages begging for help. Then they saw the chairs. Rusted metal chairs bolted to the floor beneath hanging chains stained black with dried blood. One deputy whispered, "Jesus Christ." At the far end of the basement sat an old television connected to a VHS recorder. Aaron pressed play with trembling fingers. Static filled the screen before grainy footage appeared. Emily Cross sat tied to a chair, crying uncontrollably. Blood ran down her forehead. A distorted male voice behind the camera spoke calmly. "Do you hear them, Emily?" She screamed for help while the camera moved closer. "The voices beneath the ground," the man whispered. "They never stopped screaming." Emily suddenly looked directly into the camera with absolute terror. "He's still here," she cried. "Please don't let him bury me." The tape abruptly ended. Silence swallowed the basement. Even Sheriff Hargrove looked shaken. Then Aaron noticed something hidden behind the television. A fresh shovel covered in wet soil. The dirt smelled exactly like the cemetery. Before anyone could react, the basement light suddenly died. Darkness consumed the room instantly. Then came the whispering. Soft voices surrounded them from every direction. Children crying, women begging, men screaming beneath the earth. Deputies panicked, shining flashlights wildly while whispers echoed through the basement walls. Aaron felt someone breathing beside his ear. A voice whispered slowly, "She wasn't the first." Then a deputy screamed upstairs. Gunshots exploded above them. Sheriff Hargrove ordered everyone back up immediately. Aaron sprinted toward the staircase while the whispering grew louder behind him. When they reached the living room, Deputy Collins lay dead on the floor with his throat ripped open. Blood sprayed across the wallpaper, but nobody saw the killer. The front door stood wide open, swinging slowly in the wind. And written across the wall above Collins's body in fresh blood were 6 horrifying words: "The graves are not empty." Aaron's heartbeat nearly stopped as thunder exploded above the hollow house, and every deputy stared at the blood-covered message painted across the wall like a warning from hell itself. Deputy Collins' body twitched once on the floor before becoming still forever, his wide eyes frozen in terror as rainwater drifted through the open doorway and mixed with the blood spreading beneath him. Sheriff Hargrove immediately ordered everyone outside, but Aaron could already feel panic destroying the team. One deputy kept whispering that someone had been standing behind the staircase moments earlier. Another swore he heard children crying inside the walls. The storm intensified while they carried Collins's corpse toward the patrol vehicles. Yet Aaron couldn't stop staring back at the hollow house. A silhouette stood motionless behind the second-floor window. tall, thin, watching them. The second Aaron aimed his flashlight upward, the figure disappeared. What happened next changed everything. The coroner's office called Sheriff Hargrove with results from Emily Cross's second autopsy, and the entire investigation took a horrifying turn. Emily had not died before burial. She died inside the coffin. Dirt was discovered deep in her lungs. Splinters from the coffin wood were lodged beneath her broken fingernails. She had awakened underground and suffocated slowly in complete darkness while clawing for escape. Emily Cross had been buried alive. Her mother collapsed after hearing the news, screaming uncontrollably outside the police station, while reporters flooded Grivens Hollow, demanding answers. The town erupted into fear overnight. Parents refused to let children leave their homes. Churches remained open 24 hours a day, but Aaron couldn't shake one impossible detail from his mind. If Emily died inside the coffin 3 days earlier, then who had been screaming beneath the grave the night they dug her up? By midnight, the sheriff ordered all evidence from the Hollow House transported back to the station. Aaron personally reviewed the VHS tape again in a dark evidence room, while rain battered the windows outside. He slowed the footage frame by frame. Emily sat terrified in the chair, crying and shaking, but Aaron noticed something hidden in the background that nobody else had seen. Behind Emily, buried within the shadows, stood another person, barely visible. A woman wearing white clothing, long black hair covering her face, completely motionless. Aaron froze the frame. The woman looked impossibly pale, almost transparent, like part of the darkness itself. Then Aaron noticed the timestamp on the tape. The recording had been made 2 days after Emily's official funeral. Aaron immediately ran to Sheriff Hargrove's office, but before he could speak, the station lights suddenly failed. Darkness swallowed the building. Backup generators struggled to activate while frightened voices echoed through the halls. Then the emergency phone lines exploded with calls. Residents across Grivens Hollow reported hearing screaming from the cemetery again. Some claimed voices were coming from beneath multiple graves now, not just Emily's. Others reported seeing people standing among the tombstones despite the storm. Sheriff Hargrove ordered every available deputy to the cemetery immediately. When Aaron arrived, dozens of terrified townspeople already surrounded the gates, many crying while distant screams drifted through the rain-soaked graveyard. It sounded like dozens of voices buried underground. Some begged for help, others screamed in agony. One elderly man collapsed after hearing his dead daughter's voice calling his name beneath the dirt. The cemetery became chaos. Deputies fought to hold people back while the screams echoed louder beneath the earth. Then, suddenly, all sound stopped at once. Dead silence. Even the wind disappeared. Aaron slowly turned toward Emily's grave and felt ice crawl through his veins. The soil above the coffin had collapsed inward. Something had dug its way out. Sheriff Hargrove ordered a full search of the cemetery while terrified officers spread between the graves. Aaron moved carefully through rows of tombstones with his flashlight shaking violently in his hand. That was when he discovered the footprints. Bare human footprints in deep mud, leading away from Emily's grave toward Blackthorn Forest. The prints looked wrong somehow, twisted, uneven, like the person walking had broken bones. Aaron followed them beyond the cemetery fence, while distant thunder rolled across the sky. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, but he kept moving deeper into the trees until he saw light ahead, a cabin hidden among the woods. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was living there. Aaron approached slowly and noticed dozens of animal bones hanging from strings around the porch. Wind chimes made from human teeth clicked softly in the darkness. The front door stood slightly open. Inside smelled like rotting meat and bleach. Candles flickered beside walls covered with newspaper clippings about missing persons from the last 30 years. Emily Cross's photograph hung in the center beside at least 14 other victims. Some dated back decades. Then, Aaron heard movement upstairs. Slow footsteps. He drew his weapon and climbed carefully toward the second floor. The hallway above was lined with old dolls missing their eyes. At the end of the corridor stood a single locked door. Scratching noises came from inside. Aaron kicked the door open and nearly screamed. A woman sat chained against the wall covered in dirt and dried blood. Her skin looked pale gray under the candlelight, one eye swollen shut, lips cracked from dehydration. Aaron lowered his gun slowly as she whispered, "Please, he'll come back." Aaron immediately recognized her face from the missing persons wall downstairs. Rachel Vane, missing since 1998, 30 years old when she vanished, but she looked barely older now. Rachel grabbed Aaron's arm desperately. "You need to leave," she whispered. "He buries them alive because he says the dead speak to him." Aaron tried unlocking the chains while asking who he was, but Rachel suddenly became hysterical. "He hears the voices beneath the graves," she cried. "He says the earth whispers secrets to him at night." Before Aaron could question her further, footsteps echoed downstairs. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Someone had entered the cabin. Aaron killed his flashlight instantly while the footsteps moved closer toward the staircase. Rachel began shaking violently. "Don't let him see me awake," she whispered. "Please." Aaron aimed his weapon toward the hallway as the footsteps climbed upward one stair at a time. The figure finally appeared at the end of the corridor wearing a black raincoat soaked with mud. Tall, thin, face hidden beneath darkness. The man carried a shovel in one hand and a rusty lantern in the other. Aaron shouted for him to stop, but the figure simply tilted his head unnaturally sideways. Then he spoke in a calm, broken voice that made Aaron's blood run cold. "You should not have opened the graves." The hallway lights suddenly exploded. Darkness swallowed everything. Gunshots thundered through the cabin while Rachel screamed. Aaron fired twice toward the figure, but hit nothing. Then something smashed into him from behind. He crashed into the wall, dropping his weapon as the lantern rolled across the floor, casting spinning shadows everywhere. Aaron looked up just long enough to see the man standing over him holding a syringe. "The voices chose you too," the man whispered before stabbing the needle into Aaron's neck. Darkness consumed him instantly. Aaron woke buried underground. Total blackness crushed around him. Dirt filled his mouth as panic exploded through his body. He could barely breathe. Wood pressed inches from his face. Coffin walls. He screamed and clawed wildly while soil shifted above him. Every breath became harder. Nails tore from his fingers as he pounded against the lid in complete terror. Then he heard it, whispering. Voices surrounding the coffin from every direction beneath the earth. Crying, begging, hundreds of trapped voices. One whispered directly beside his ear. "He keeps us here." Aaron screamed louder while splinters cut through his hands. Oxygen vanished rapidly. He felt himself dying. Then suddenly the coffin lid burst open above him. Fresh air flooded inside as bright flashlight beams blinded his eyes. Deputies dragged Aaron out of the grave while Sheriff Hargrove shouted his name repeatedly. Aaron collapsed onto wet grass, vomiting dirt and blood while paramedics rushed toward him. He had been buried inside the cemetery less than 20 feet from Emily's grave, but the most horrifying part came moments later. Rachel Vane's body was discovered inside the same grave beside Aaron, dead for over 20 years. Her corpse was partially mummified, wrapped in chains beneath the soil. Yet Aaron had spoken to her alive inside the cabin only hours earlier. Sheriff Hargrove refused to believe Aaron's story, assuming the drug burial caused hallucinations, but Aaron knew what he saw. Rachel had been alive. She touched him, spoke to him, warned him. Then another discovery shattered the entire case completely. Forensic teams searched the cabin before dawn and found hundreds of VHS tapes hidden beneath the floorboards. Each tape contained recordings of victims buried alive, while a masked figure forced them to listen to voices coming from underground graves. Some tapes dated back 40 years. But the final tape terrified investigators most. It showed Sheriff Daniel Hargrove himself standing beside the masked killer deep inside Blackthorn Cemetery only 6 nights earlier. And together, they were lowering Emily Cross into the ground while she was still breathing. Aaron stared at the television screen in complete disbelief, while the storm outside the station shook the windows hard enough to sound like fists pounding against the glass. Every deputy in the evidence room fell silent after watching Sheriff Daniel Hargrove appear beside the masked man in the cemetery footage. Emily Cross could clearly be seen inside the coffin, struggling weakly, her muffled screams barely audible while dirt rained down across the lid. Sheriff Hargrove stood emotionless beside the grave, holding a lantern as the masked killer whispered something into Emily's coffin before sealing it shut forever. Then the tape ended in static. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Aaron felt his entire body turning numb. The man who had led the investigation from the beginning, the man trusted by the entire town, had buried Emily alive with his own hands. Deputy Morgan slowly backed away from the screen. whispering, "This can't be real." But deep down, every officer already knew it was. Sheriff Hargrove had controlled every detail of the case from day one. He ordered the rushed funeral. He sealed the original autopsy report. He kept everyone away from Blackthorn Forest, and worst of all, he was always first to arrive whenever the voices appeared beneath the graves. Suddenly, the station lights flickered again. Aaron immediately grabbed his weapon as a dispatcher screamed from the hallway that Sheriff Hargrove was gone. His office stood empty. The back exit remained open, rain blowing inside across muddy footprints leading into the darkness. What happened next sent Griffin's Hollow into complete panic. Emergency calls flooded the station from terrified residents reporting screams echoing beneath their homes. People claimed voices were coming from drains, basements, and even inside walls. One family discovered bloody handprints appearing beneath their kitchen floorboards. Another found dirt leaking from electrical outlets, while children cried that someone was whispering their names at night. The town felt infected by fear itself. Aaron knew there was only one place Hargrove would go: Blackthorn Cemetery. By the time deputies arrived near dawn, fog covered the graveyard so heavily, the tombstones looked like shadows floating in smoke. Aaron stepped carefully between graves while whispers drifted through the darkness from somewhere underground. Then he saw lantern light near the center of the cemetery. Sheriff Hargrove stood beside an open grave, holding a shovel stained with fresh mud. His uniform was soaked from rain, his face pale and hollow like a man who had not slept in years. Beside him lay another coffin, already prepared for burial. Aaron raised his weapon instantly, while deputies surrounded the cemetery. "It's over, Daniel," Aaron shouted. "Step away from the grave." But Hargrove only smiled weakly. "You still don't understand," he whispered. Thunder rolled across the sky while the sheriff slowly pointed toward the ground beneath them. They never stopped talking. Aaron demanded to know how many people he killed, but Hargrove laughed quietly, almost sadly. "Killed?" he repeated. "No, Elias Thorne taught me the truth long ago. The dead aren't silent in Griffin's Hollow. They scream beneath the earth forever." Aaron's blood ran cold hearing the name Elias Thorne again. Hargrove explained that 30 years earlier, he investigated disappearances inside Blackthorn Forest and eventually discovered the Hollow House. That was where he met Elias Thorne, the mortician who believed certain people could hear voices trapped beneath graves. Thorne claimed the cemetery was built over something ancient buried deep underground long before the town existed. Something alive. Hargrove admitted he thought Thorne was insane at first, until he heard the voices himself. "Once you hear them," Hargrove whispered, tears filling his eyes, "they never leave you alone again." Aaron noticed the sheriff's hands trembling violently. "You bury people alive," Aaron said. "Emily Cross begged for help while you covered her coffin with dirt." Hargrove closed his eyes painfully. Emily heard the voices too, just like the others. Thorne believed burying them fed whatever lies beneath this town. The fog thickened around the cemetery while whispers rose louder beneath the soil. Deputies exchanged terrified looks as faint cries echoed under their feet. Aaron stepped closer cautiously. "Where is Elias Thorne?" Hargrove slowly opened his eyes again. "Dead," he whispered. "At least, I thought he was." Suddenly, a deputy screamed from the far side of the cemetery. Everyone turned toward the mausoleum near the tree line where a figure stood motionless in darkness. Tall, thin, wearing black funeral clothing covered in mud. The masked killer, Elias Thorne. He had been alive the entire time. Gunfire erupted instantly as deputies opened fire toward the figure, but Thorne vanished into the fog before bullets struck him. Then the ground beneath the cemetery trembled violently. Graves began collapsing inward one after another while screams erupted from underground louder than ever before. Some deputies fled in panic. Others dropped to their knees, covering their ears. Aaron watched in horror as dirt burst upward from several graves like something was moving beneath the earth itself. Hargrove suddenly grabbed Aaron's arm desperately. "You have to stop him before sunrise," he cried. "He's opening the chamber." Aaron demanded to know what chamber meant, but before Hargrove could answer, a gunshot exploded through the fog. Blood sprayed across Aaron's face. Sheriff Hargrove collapsed backward into the open grave with a bullet through his throat. Deputies shouted in panic while the masked figure emerged briefly between tombstones holding a revolver. Then Thorne disappeared again into Blackthorn Forest. Aaron immediately chased him alone despite deputies screaming for him to stop. Rain hammered through the trees while distant whispers guided him deeper into the woods toward the Hollow House. The front door stood open once more. Lantern light flickered inside. Aaron moved carefully through the rotting hallway until he heard voices below the basement. Dozens of voices. Crying, begging. He descended slowly with his weapon raised and nearly froze from terror. The basement floor had been broken open, revealing a massive tunnel descending deep underground beneath the house. Ancient stone stairs disappeared into darkness, while cold air carrying the smell of decay rose from below. Symbols covered the tunnel walls, thousands of names carved into stone. Aaron followed the voices downward for several minutes until the tunnel opened into a gigantic underground chamber hidden beneath Griven's Hollow. His flashlight revealed hundreds of coffins, buried upright along the walls, stretching endlessly into darkness. Some coffins shook violently from inside. Others leaked blood through cracks in the wood. At the center of the chamber stood Elias Thorne beside a massive pit descending into blackness deeper than Aaron could see. The old mortician slowly removed his mask for the first time. His face looked horribly wrong. Skin gray and cracked like a corpse left underwater too long. Eyes completely white. Thorne smiled as Aaron approached. "Do you hear them now?" he whispered. The voices became deafening around the chamber. Aaron realized the whispers weren't coming from ghosts. They were coming from inside the coffins. Some victims were still alive underground after all these years. Thorne explained that the thing beneath Griven's Hollow fed on fear and suffering. He claimed the town survived for generations by offering sacrifices beneath the cemetery. Missing people, runaways, children nobody would search for. Buried alive so the voices would continue forever beneath the earth. Aaron felt sick listening to him. "You're insane," he shouted. Thorne only smiled wider, then explained the screams from empty graves. Suddenly, coffins around the chamber began shaking violently as muffled cries echoed everywhere. Aaron moved closer and heard scratching from inside the nearest coffin. Weak, desperate scratching. He smashed the lock open with his weapon and nearly collapsed in horror. Inside lay Emily Cross, alive, barely breathing. Her body was skeletal, fingernails destroyed, eyes swollen from darkness, but she was alive. Thorne had removed her from the grave before deputies arrived and hidden her underground the entire time. Emily grabbed Aaron's arm weakly, whispering, "Don't let him bury me again." Rage exploded through Aaron as he aimed his weapon at Thorne, but the old mortician laughed calmly. "Too late," he whispered. The ground suddenly shook beneath the chamber as a deep roar echoed upward from the endless pit behind him. Not human, something ancient, something alive. Coffins burst open across the chamber, while terrified survivors crawled out screaming into the darkness. Some looked trapped underground for decades. Others appeared half dead from starvation. Chaos erupted instantly. Thorne stepped backward toward the pit while Aaron fired repeatedly into his chest. Bullets tore through the old man, yet he continued smiling even while collapsing into darkness below. His final words echoed through the chamber forever. "The voices will never stop." Then the pit swallowed him whole. Aaron dragged Emily toward the tunnel while survivors screamed behind them. The underground chamber began collapsing violently. Dirt and stone crashed from above while whispers turned into deafening shrieks beneath the earth. Aaron barely escaped the hollow house seconds before the entire property collapsed inward, swallowed by the ground along with the chamber beneath it. Fire consumed the ruins while terrified survivors stumbled from Blackthorn Forest into Sunrise for the first time in years. Authorities later uncovered dozens of hidden graves beneath Griven's Hollow connected to disappearances dating back nearly half a century. Sheriff Hargrove was blamed for the murders alongside Elias Thorne. The town became a national horror story overnight. But even after the investigation officially ended, Aaron could never escape what he heard beneath the cemetery. Weeks later, he resigned from the department and prepared to leave Griven's Hollow forever. On his final night in town, Aaron stopped beside Blackthorn Cemetery one last time. The grave stood silent beneath cold moonlight, empty, peaceful, until he heard it again. Faint scratching beneath the dirt directly under his feet. Then a weak voice whispered from underground, "There's still more of us down here."